Underneath both of them. No, you're going to have to do it that side. Put them both on one side. Yeah. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you very much for having me again here for a second time. And it is a pertinent issue, something that is very common, especially in society in this day and age. MashaAllah, Sheikh Asad has touched on really important things, especially one of the things that really stood out to me is about balance. And balance is very important. We see in the world around us, in nature itself, when things shift to one side or another, there's always chaos, and it's the same with humans as well. Humans are very complex in many ways. We are in a universe, but humans within themselves are a bit of a universe as well. And there's many things, many aspects, many facets towards ourselves, many things that we have in our lives. One of the things that always stood out to me is a quote that's attributed to Rumi, where he says that you're not a drop in the ocean, you're an entire ocean in a single drop. So there's many layers under the ocean. I mean, so many things that are there, and it's the same with humans. Underneath the surface, there's so much going on for them. So depression is one of them things that's very pertinent, as I mentioned. It's something that we've all probably heard, a word that we've all heard. It's one of the most common mental health disorders. As a psychotherapist, it's something that I encounter pretty much all the time. And it can be standalone on its own as well, where people can come in with this low mood state or hopelessness. Or it can come with comorbidities as well, where it comes with a different mental health order, like a disorder like trauma or something. So it presents very commonly. Now, in the presentation that I've got, we're kind of looking at how we can overcome depression through the use of modern psychotherapy. Modern psychotherapy is, it's advancing. We're still learning about many things. But some of the things that Sheikh Asad mentioned about spirituality and things, as being factors to overcome depression is becoming quite predominant now in psychotherapy. Although in the presentation I've kind of kept it generic, but I will show you how it can link, especially to Islam itself or within the religion. One of the things that I'm going to mention before I kind of go into the presentation is the presentation is not a means for diagnosis. It's by no means you looking at yourself and say, I've got depression. What it is just creating awareness around depression and understanding it, because it impacts people very differently. The second thing is I've wanted to keep the presentation quite functional. So it's about imparting skills in which we can look after our own mental health. And by having good habits and healthy routines, we can stave off these really intense lows that we can experience, that can be experienced in depression. So that's what I'm hoping to do through the presentation. Going into the presentation, what we'll be kind of looking at is defining and understanding depression, because like I said, depression's got many factors as well. It's got different stages that are in there. As Sheikh Asad mentioned, low mood states can be quite normal, and in fact they're quite important for us. The world that we live in, we navigate and understand it through contrast. Okay, so what happens is we understand heat by experiencing cold. We understand bitter through experiencing sweet by experiencing bitter, day through night. So that contrast gives us perspective in our life. Similarly, low mood states are important because happiness would never have a meaning if we didn't know what a low mood would be like. So they are important things. But however, depression is slightly different because it can be quite persevering, quite persistent and long term. And that's what we're going to be looking at. So kind of understanding what depression is, we'll be looking at statistics on depression just to give it a bit of context. Okay. Symptoms and causes of depression, so how we can identify it. We'll be looking at treatment options. I've put this in. There'll be areas there that I'm not going to really go into too much, but just for general knowledge, treatment options for depression. In this section, I'll kind of show you what happens and how we can overcome depression. Coping with depression, so there'll be skills that I'll impart with you through this. One of the areas that I'm going to be touching on is stigma and cycles of shame, because it can be quite, for someone that's stuck in depression, one of the things that can happen is not wanting to reach out for help. There's many factors towards this, okay, and we'll discuss them when we come in. But then moving forward with hope and healing, what we can actually do to actually overcome depression, make this something that's more resilient, or build resilience within ourselves, so that these things can be long term. So as a kind of a definition of depression, and Sheikh Asad just touched on this quite well, okay, it is that intense feeling of hopelessness, okay, a constant state of feeling sad, a loss of interest, no feeling of joy, okay. It does affect us in many ways. It can affect obviously our mind, it affects our body, it can cause all sorts of other symptoms as well. It kind of affects different parts of our life, so our work life, our relationships, how we are in society. It's kind of characterized by these feelings of tiredness, emotional kind of symptoms, irritability, being kind of angry or frustrated, restlessness, problems concentrating. So it affects us in many different ways. And it's quite strange. We will go into the symptoms, but it can be quite different. So it can kind of be insomnia where we can't sleep, or hypersomnia where we just oversleep. It can be like not wanting to eat, and then it can be overeating as well. So it impacts people very differently. And it kind of ranges from mild, and it can go all the way to severe. And this is where depression, like I said about low mood state and depression, are very different things. So there's a difference between feeling depressed and actual depression. But when it kind of becomes severe, it kind of lasts for weeks, and it can be even months, and it can even go on for years. And if it's untreated and we stay in that state, then it can progress as well. So it can have psychotic symptoms as well, so where people can start hallucinating or hearing voices and all sorts of other complications. One of the things that we want to highlight in this is it's not a sign of weakness or personal failings, okay? It is a real medical condition, and it can be treated, it can be managed through the right kind of resources and support. It can be totally overcome. So kind of looking at some of the statistics on depression, within the UK itself, okay, 1 in 6 adults can have from moderate to severe depression. For some reason it's more common in women than it is actually in men. And they say around 17% of the adults in the UK have been having some form of depression compared to just before actual COVID. So if you look at the chart, it kind of shows just pre-COVID, it was around 10% of the population, then it kind of rose up. Currently it's at 17%, and this was in September of 2021. What kind of happened here that was quite significant in the UK was cost of living went up. And obviously that's going to cause a plethora of different problems for people. It's going to cause worries, it's going to cause all sorts of other problems. 56% of employees are experiencing symptoms of depression. So I think it's the second most common cause for people not attending work. And it's kind of progressing more and more. We're having even younger cases now, so like the levels of, with depression you'll kind of commonly get anxiety as well. And the lowest level of, or the highest level of anxiety within children is pretty much now as well. So you know, it is becoming a bit of a problem, and it is one of them things that we need to start talking about as a community if we want to overcome some of these challenges. Because as a community, when we talk about it, we are a collective, and individuals within that collective matter. If there's part of that collective that's struggling, okay, it does actually spread out to other parts of the community. So it's something that we need to kind of be aware of and work through. So just a bit of information here, okay. I'm not going to go into some of these things too much. Depression is one of them things, I mean, if we wanted to, we could have session after session about it, okay. But that's not the aim of the presentation. It's just to kind of give a brief overview and some understanding. Mainly we want to focus on the coping strategies that we're going to go on to later on in this presentation. But here's some of the things that will happen, okay. So major depressive disorders, and these are like when it kind of defines the mood, low mood, over a period of 2 weeks or more, and it's the majority of that period. Persistent depressive disorders are ones that can carry on for years and years, and they come and go. You get things like seasonal affective disorders. Okay, these are mainly by the weather. So you'll see people will have dipped moods within, especially the winter months. And then there's postpartum depression or postnatal depression, which women experience, after delivering children. Bipolar disorder as well. This is something that the DSM has kind of moved in. That's the diagnostic statistic manual that we kind of work off as therapists. It's kind of moved its category. However, there's depression. So the person in this state can have very, very periods of very, very low moods. And then they can have periods where they're absolutely manic and elated. So there's kind of different types of depression. This is very brief overview, as I mentioned. But we'll move on to the causes. So depression is not as simple as just nailing it down to one thing. In fact, one of the things, especially in severe depression, can be that people do not understand why they are depressed. So life can be normal for them, in many ways. They're just generally unhappy and feel hopeless. There's many kind of things that they've have been listed. So some of the biological factors that can be chemical imbalances in the brain. This was going on previously, was kind of taken as a significant factor. With kind of modern view on it now, there's slight changes within how people how scientists are seeing this, and they're not exactly able to identify what it might be. However, in these kind of situations, antidepressants is something that's common. From my own experience as a therapist, I found that some people, for them it's quite, the use of antidepressants works for them. For some it doesn't. But however, that kind of just shows you how complex depression can be and how it impacts people differently. Another thing is genetics and family history. So if there's people within the family, that have depression, it kind of doubles the likelihood of people developing depression themselves. So it can be a significant factor. And then there's chronic medical illnesses or conditions. So thyroid problems, sleep problems, certain forms of cancer and stuff like this, or any kind of long-term kind of illnesses can have can be a cause or significant cause towards depression. Psychological factors that can happen are traumatic life events where people experience some form of trauma. This can have depression, chronic stress, negative thinking patterns, which is very common in depression. We're going to be looking at this later on. Other causes, social factors. One of the earlier kind of studies that I looked at within, especially Western civilization, one of the most significant factors towards depression is loneliness. So social isolation can be a big cause of depression, and it's kind of a cycle that people get caught up into. So when kind of depression sets in and them feelings of being overwhelmed, hopeless, just feeling worn down and drained, the behaviors that come out from that is just not wanting to do anything. And that kind of drives that social isolation even more, and then that causes more rumination, and people get trapped in this cycle, which we will talk about coming out of. So social isolation, relationship problems, unemployment and financial stress, that's something that we've seen over the years. Okay, so when we were in lockdown, one of the things that we heard about a lot was relationship problems. Obviously people being cooped up in a house, not being able to go out. And then obviously people losing jobs, and then now the cost of living. So there's been all sorts of kind of things that are driving this. So social factors that contribute towards depression. Environmental factors as well, substance abuse, something I work with Monday to Friday. This became a massive problem in COVID times. Now what happens with substances is, when a person uses a substance, it gives an instantaneous dopamine hit, which kind of raises mood states. Now, what happens is the body and the mind kind of gets used to them. What happened was in COVID situations where people were stockpiling. Obviously, a person that's used to substances, they were stockpiling substances basically. The more you use, the more tolerance, the body's tolerance raises towards that, and it becomes a big problem, because to get the same amount of that hit, that feeling, that feel-good factor, more substance needs to be used, and it became a big problem. People started learning about online, purchasing online. So alcohol, which is not prohibited in this country, but people kind of started ordering it from supermarkets and stuff, so it started becoming a big problem. Lack of exposure to sunlight, pollution, other environmental toxins, they can be factors within depression. So symptoms, so what does it feel like for someone who's suffering with depression? And they can be these kind of really, and it can be, for a person that actually goes through depression, it's very, very tough. So there can be these real persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and just a general emptiness in everything. Don't feel connected to the self or anything around them. There can be changes in appetite and sleep patterns. One of the most common things in any mental health presentation is sleep. Sleep is the one thing that goes first. With depression, though, it can be very different in a sense that people can just feel so burnt out and tired that they just spend loads of amounts of time in bed. There's difficulty in concentrating, making decisions, and these are something that become impinged. For someone, when I work with depression, or when we work with depression, or we try and help support people that are in depression, one of the things that can be a massive challenge is just getting them to do things. Every task feels like climbing a mountain. It just feels so much for them. And one of the things that they can't do is just think clearly. It's just all they see is that hopelessness, that sad state, and that feeling of just emptiness. Loss of interest in activities and hobbies. This is something that happens. They generally tend to withdraw, not wanting to go out, wanting to do everything. Fatigue and decreased energy levels. Obviously, this impacts efficiency. They just can't find the energy. Just feel completely burnt out all the time. The other thing that happens is this feelings of worthlessness and guilt or shame, and these can be very, very strong in people that feel depression. And then the obvious thing that kind of happens is obviously this thought of death and suicide. What am I actually doing here? Why am I even here? I'm just a burden on anyone. And it can be really, really overwhelming and traumatic. And it's, seeing people go through that, especially, I don't know if anyone's ever had a family member or anyone going through severe depression. It's horrible because we don't know how to help them sometimes. And when they kind of state these kind of feelings of just not wanting to be here, it's very, very difficult for family members and other individuals as well, and for the individual themselves as well. It's horrible. So kind of looking at treatment options, and this is something that I'm not going to delve into too much, especially the side on medication. But medication is an option, and I've said, through my experience, I've found people that would use antidepressant, anti-anxiety and antipsychotics, or whatever they've been given, can have an impact on that, on changing them feelings. As a therapist myself, when people present, sometimes you can present in really bad states, and having medication or people using medication can take the edge off it a bit, and it can help us to work with them. So I would never ever rule this out. Okay, there is massive arguments that you'll hear, whether they are prescribed too often or not prescribed at all or whatever. But this is something in the realm of medics, to be honest. But definitely they can be something that can help with the depression, and it is an option to be explored. If anyone does feel it, do speak to your GP about it. Don't just kind of rule it out. The other thing, which is an area of comfort for me, is psychotherapy, and I've mentioned certain things over here. So we've got general counselling, we've got cognitive behavioural therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. Really, there's loads of models, there's the psychodynamic theories. There's loads of different models of talking therapies, and they can have massive impact on changing people's perspectives. And this is where we work a lot on the cognitions, on the thoughts and the behaviours. There's a lot of research that shows that it can help people overcome depression. Combined with medication, it shows there's a lot of benefit there as well. But there is other things. So kind of holistic therapies where you have these kind of like massage treatments and mindfulness activities, nutrition, focusing on just diet and exercise. They can have a massive impact. When we are looking at depression, and this is really where it kind of comes in, and it's where I kind of break it down for you in essence. There's two main areas that we work with as therapists, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is not not as a kind of treatment. It's not intended as treatment, but just for your understanding. However, in therapy, we kind of work towards clients becoming their own therapists, okay? And when it comes to depressive symptoms, there's two significant factors. Forgive the jargon, I will break it down for you, okay? One of the things is mobilization, and this is just getting people moving. In depression, it's about working with small things. Even little activities like brushing teeth, bathing, combing hair, changing clothes, they can be massive. People can really struggle with them. Self-neglect is one of the common features of depression, where people just don't want to do anything. Getting people to actually mobilize is one of the first challenges, just getting them doing these things and then getting them outdoors, working up towards that. So this is an area that we kind of work on. The second factor is rumination, and this is where people overthink, and it's where things like guilt, shame, resentment, just low self-esteem kick in, where people really think bad of themselves, overthink situations, and it's just that constantly being in your head. And this is, in depression, this is one of the things that drains people the most, is the mind does not stop. It's relentless, and it just goes on, and it can say some of the most horrible things. It's a strange relationship we have with ourselves. Sometimes our mind can become our own worst enemy, and when people are in this kind of place, we can say such things that are very nasty, that we say to ourselves that we would never ever say to anyone else. We wouldn't say to anyone else. So this is one of the big challenges, is actually stopping that rumination. And both of these go hand in hand, because once we get people mobilizing and moving and doing things, one of the things that they stop doing is overthinking. And when they stop doing that, generally they start feeding, both of these feed each other. And it kind of, one of the significant things that happen or significant factors in overcoming depression. Depression is very complex, and we can go into this in detail, because like I said, every individual is different, and there's different factors that come up for every individual. But these are kind of more general kind of things, areas that we work on pretty much with every client. So they were worth mentioning and bringing up. So when we look at strategies for coping with depression, so when we look at taking to them two factors, okay, mobilizing and ruminating. So one of the things in mobilizing is social support, helping people to connect with others. Human interaction is an interesting area. It is something that can be very significant, because people can motivate us and they can demotivate us as well. But really it's about having, because we are part of a whole, we are part of a collective. And when we talked about when Sheikh Asad mentioned about obviously the initial part through the Quranic sources, we're defined as a ummah for a reason, okay, and part of an extensive one if we look at that, okay. So using social support is important. And in fact, if you look at it differently, when we look at social support, when we look at humans that don't behave themselves, what we do firstly and foremostly, we take away their freedom, yeah. So we'll put them in prison, and then if they don't behave when they're in prison, we put them into social isolation. Anyone in prolonged social isolation can go absolutely crazy. So it's quite important to have that social support. So a depressed person can pretty much isolate themselves completely. Now, okay, and like I mentioned before, in the Western countries, one of the most significant factors is social isolation. Isolation is one of the main factors that drives depression. Routine, okay. Remember again, bad decision making that happens in depression. Having some sort of a structure and routine can really help that person, because one of the things that they'll do is wake up in the morning and not know what to do with themselves. So having some sort of a routine can make a massive difference, and that can be starting with just the simple things: getting up, getting dressed, having breakfast, just taking care of the cells, little things like that, and then finally getting them to get outside and get outdoors. So outdoors, nature has a massive healing property as well for humans. Being outdoors is very significant. And then just general hygiene, just looking after themselves. When it comes to ruminating, so we have what we call here is mindfulness, and I'm going to show you a technique for mindfulness as well, which is a grounding technique, which is basically us connecting with the world that we're in, okay, and being aware of what we're doing rather than living in our head. So humans have this kind of weird thing. We connect through the world through our senses, okay, so what we hear, what we smell, what we feel, but we have this amazing capacity to actually live in our head. So that can be in the past, which is a place where we can have these feelings of regret, remorse, guilt, shame, all of these things. Or we can live in our future, which is uncertainty, which we don't like as well, and that can lead to anxieties. So mindfulness is just kind of bringing our senses into the place that we are, okay, and just experiencing life as it's happening rather than overthinking things. Meditation is another one as well. It can help us focus our thoughts, control our mind. We're going to talk about that later on as well, and we will look at it from the Islamic perspective of how we can do that, because it's quite interesting, the mention of spirituality by Sheikh Asad. But one of the things that we do even in our salah is meditate as well, and we'll talk about that. But journaling as well. So this is writing down our experiences and learning from our life. So as a human, I've never ever come across a human that's never made a mistake. Okay, and mistakes don't define people. Okay, so good people make mistakes. Okay, it's just how it is. Journaling is a way that we can actually write down our experiences and have a look at what we were actually doing. A higher level of self-awareness is not looking at toxicity within society or the individuals, or this person's like that person's like that. It's actually looking within ourselves and seeing why I'm actually resonating with this toxicity and how can I stop doing that. And journaling is a very effective method in that. So there's the concept of muhasabah, taking itself to account. What have I done through the day? What have I learned from that, and how can I do things better? It's not a form of punishment, okay? So it's not about delving into mistakes and thinking, why did I do that? It's about what can I learn from that and what can I change? Positive self-talk, and this is a big thing, okay? It's actually seeing yourself in light of who you are. Humans learn through making mistakes, okay? It doesn't mean that you're a bad individual, and we don't need to run ourselves down. One of the things that can happen in depression is we can talk really negatively about ourselves. And as I mentioned, we can say such things to ourselves that we would never ever say to anyone else, So this is something that we kind of look at. So mobilizing and ruminating, these are the two things that we need to work on in stopping this from happening to improve our mood state. So when we go into coping strategies, and remember at the beginning I said I want to keep this presentation functional. I want to give you guys skills or knowledge that you can actually use. Prevention is always better than cure. So we're looking at how we can improve our mental health so we don't come to this point in our life where we just feel completely overwhelmed and we can't do anything. So some of the things that we can actually do as coping strategies, and one of the first things and foremost is exercise. And by exercise, I don't mean hitting the gym 4 or 5 times a week. It can be anything, okay? A nice walk outdoors can be, just as good. And in fact, there's a big drive within the South Asian community now as well to try and get them outdoors. You'll probably see all these Muslim hiking groups popping up all over the place and everything, because it really does improve mental health, okay? It's really, really good. And it can be just a walk a stroll in the local park, but getting out in nature, just doing some form of exercise. Practicing self-compassion, and this is where you actually look at yourself as a human. Humans make errors, it's just how it is, and it's kind of coming to a level of acceptance with that self. Remember when I said about journaling, it's not about beating yourself up, it's about accepting that you've made errors, and it's about developing from there. When we hear about other people, they make mistakes, and we're always good at giving advice, aren't we? So it's always, oh, don't worry about it, okay, we can learn from this, it doesn't matter, but when it comes to the self, why did you do that? And we can hold ourselves to contempt or a higher standard that we don't expect from anyone else. And it's about just having that self-compassion that you are human, you are going to make mistakes, okay, and you need to learn from them. It's not about beating yourself up or keeping yourself in that place. Engage in activities that bring joy and fulfillment. So finding things that you can do that you like. And it can be anything really, anything that engages you, and is productive. So it could be learning, it could be reading, it could be doing anything. Prioritize sleep and healthy nutrition. Sleep is important. It is where we actually nourish ourselves, okay? So having a good amount of sleep is important. And I know this can be challenging, especially in these kind of months where Isha is so late, Fajr is so early, but it's trying to get prioritize sleep in there. So instead of going back and doing other things, it's about just going to bed and getting some sleep. And healthy nutrition as well. From the chronic perspective, when we talk about eating food that's pure, okay, making sure that you eat food that is wholesome and good for you. Another thing, seek support from friends, family, therapists or support groups, and this is about connecting. And remember I mentioned humans are social animals. If you look at it, okay, We've done well as civilizations when we've collected together, we've developed, we've grown, we've built the world around us, and it's taken us time, okay, but we achieve brilliant feats through this collectiveness, through this working together. So when we are feeling down or when we're feeling overwhelmed, speak to people, reach out for support. When I said earlier on about one of the causes, or when I said about statistics in depression, I said women are more likely to feel depressed. There's one of the reasons what they kind of give around that is women are kind of do reach out, they do speak about this because they have a more nurturing kind of relationship with themselves where they speak about their problems. Part of the kind of social conditioning of men is not to actually speak out or just numb themselves or keep going through things. And one of the reasons why that might be a high statistic for women is because depression in men is just not diagnosed because we don't kind of speak about it, and it can be a tough thing, but it does need to be done. And this is what I talked about earlier on, of being part of the ummah. If you do feel you need support, reach out to people. One of the worst things that can ever happen to any individual is when we hear about someone taking their own life, and we always feel that just wish that if they just mentioned it so that we could have offer them some form of support, and it's quite difficult. So if it is something that's overwhelming you, get used to speaking out about it. And there's different types of help that you can have. There can be groups that are specifically designed to help people through depression. You can speak to a therapist, your family members, friends. Just speaking about you can help massively. One of the things when we are depressed is everything just feels enormous. Okay, it can be really difficult doing things. Break down large goals into smaller ones, okay, into achievable steps. Don't set yourself up for failure. If you have a task, break it down, chip away at it daily, okay, and just work through it. Another thing, okay, is practicing gratitude and focusing on the positives. Now, this is a very, very challenging one, especially for someone going through depression. For us generally, okay, people, we should look towards positive things in our lives. We should look for reasons to be grateful. When people are depressed, that can be very, very difficult because they don't see anything positive in their life. But no matter, there's always something positive, and sometimes we've just got to work harder to find it. But practicing gratitude is a massive thing. In fact, from ourselves, when we look at, the things that we do as Muslims, some of the du'as that we read daily, like waking up, eating food, going to the bathroom, just general things when changing clothes or whatever, they're actually a form of gratitude. And one thing is actually learning how to say the Arabic words. Another thing is actually understanding what you're saying and being thankful and grateful for some of the things that we have in our life. And it can make a massive, significant difference in our mental health. So when we're looking at prevention, this is something that we can start now. For someone that's depressed, it takes a bit of time for them to work through where they can start doing things like gratitude journals. But for ourselves, when you wake up every day, just ask yourself, what have I got to be grateful for today? And just identify one thing. It makes a massive difference to our mental health. So I mentioned journaling before, okay, and this can be you just logging down thoughts and feelings. We're going to have situations in our life where we're just going to experience low mood states. We're going to have periods where we have mistakes and we look over them and we think, oh, why did I do that for? It can actually it can be useful just for you to track your own thoughts on these. When we have any problem in life, if we focus on the pain, or the sorrow, that's all we're going to get from it, pain and sorrow. If we focus on the lesson, we will always grow from it. And this is what it's all about, being a better person than you were yesterday. You don't have to compare yourself to anyone else, but as long as you're doing better than you were yesterday, that's a significant change in itself. So just journaling down what your thoughts and feelings, what's actually happening to me here, and looking at the situations that have caused that, and looking at different perspectives, different ways of looking at it. And perspective is a massive thing. It makes a massive difference in an individual. So just by changing our perspective, we can change things. One of the things that's characteristic in depression is that a person loses trust within themselves, okay? But more than that is actually in the world itself. They start seeing the world as a dangerous place. And it's not always that. There's always really good people in the world. There's always good opportunities. And perspective, a change in perspective can make a massive difference in that. Use positive affirmations to boost self-esteem and confidence. And it's quite significant. An affirmation is what you say to yourself. And when we talked about positive self-talk, this is maybe seeing one of your qualities and repeating it to yourself, maybe, or seeing something good about yourself. And it boosts our self-esteem and confidence. When we have high self-esteem, we have good confidence, we're able to achieve better and perform better in our lives, in our jobs, in our relationships, as parents, as brothers, sisters, as just individuals. We'll just feel a lot better, and we'll be more proactive, we'll be more driven. We'll have more motivation as well. Celebrate small wins and accomplishments, and this is something, even if it's a small accomplishment, it doesn't matter how small it is, but just recognize it. Recognize something that you've done in that day, and it doesn't have to be massive, but to your overall general mental health, it makes a massive difference. Practice self-forgiveness and letting go of perfectionism. So self-forgiveness, as I mentioned, when we make mistakes, if we start ruminating over that mistake and we start holding ourselves to a massive account, what that can do is drive us down. And as I mentioned, there's no such thing as a perfect human. Actually, perfectionism itself is subjective. What's perfect? One person might see something as perfect and another will say no, so there's no such thing. It's actually about doing things. And when we look at being productive in our lives, sometimes it's just about turning up and doing that thing. It doesn't have to be perfect. Everyone around you will respond and resonate with that in different ways. So it's about overcoming this thing about it's got to be perfect. It's got to be absolutely, in a certain way. It's letting go of that and just going through life and doing things and just reaping the rewards of them. But mostly setting realistic expectations for recovery and improvement as well. Expectations are an interesting one, because a lot of our problems that we have is through our expectations. It needs to be like this, and then when it doesn't, it's like, and it's about letting go of these expectations sometimes, just going with the ebb and flow of life, and just showing up for yourself and others. And one of the last things is challenging negative self-talk. In depression, one of the common features, and when we talk about self-awareness, it's about focusing on the language that we use with ourselves, how we actually see ourselves. There's a saying that says the words, they move hearts and hearts move limbs. So what we say to ourselves is important, because then words will help us move our limbs, help us function as we are. So if that self-talk is very negative, then we are spiraling down to low mood states. And when someone is depressed, they will say some of the most horrendous things about themselves, and it's a kind of breaking that cycle and just being aware of that. You're not perfect. You never will be perfect. No one expects you to be perfect. We as humans know that there's no such thing as perfection. We know everyone makes mistakes. If there's anyone here that's never made a mistake, by all means you can say that, but generally we know everyone makes mistakes, even from the confines of religion itself as well. Allah doesn't expect perfection from us. In fact, He says there is nothing perfect other than Him. Okay, so you're always going to make mistakes, and this is one of them things. It's about learning from them and developing and growing, not a form of punishment or holding yourself down. So right over here we've got this is some of the techniques that I mentioned about just kind of practicing. Okay, so one of the things that we have here is mindful breathing. Okay, just taking time just to check in with yourselves, check in with your thoughts, and this can be done daily, and just about breathing. One of the things that happens especially when you have anxiety is our breathing can become very shallow. The CO2 levels in our body, they diminish or they reduce, and what happens is we start feeling symptoms in our body. So this can be like stomach churning, dry throat, lightheadedness, and then when we start feeling these, we start thinking, oh, what's going on? And then that thought pattern then is a negative thought, and then we drive ourselves in these cycles, and it's about coming through them. So one of the things that we can actually do is just take some time out during the day. Okay, make time for yourself, because the self is the biggest investment. Okay, you'll only be as functional or as good as you feel. So taking time out to check in with yourself and just practice a bit of deep breathing, and you can do this just by sitting comfortably in some place. Okay, There's different types of breathing techniques. This one is a balloon technique, and it's a kind of imagining that you have a balloon in your abdomen. It can be any color, something that you find relaxing and comfortable. And all it is breathing in, holding or inflating that, feeling that balloon inflate. So becoming accustomed to the sensations in your body, holding for a short while and then exhaling. Now, generally in any breathing technique, what we try and do is we try and our outward breath always needs to be longer than our inward breath. Okay. Everyone has different lung capacity, so it can be, what I generally try and do is the 5-11, so it's 5 seconds in, 11 seconds out, and holding for 3 in between. For some people it can be 4 seconds in, holding for 3, and then breathing out for 8. But whatever works for you. Well, what it'll help you do is just help you calm yourselves in the moments. So if you're finding yourself in moments where you're extremely frustrated, angry, feeling hopeless, just feeling tired, okay, just taking a few minutes, finding a place where you can sit down, closing your eyes, and just taking deep breaths in, holding for a short while, and then just breathing out, and letting the outward breath be longer than the inward breath. What it actually does is it helps you control. It's all fixed around control. What you can do is breathe in them. If you're having negative thoughts, it's breathing in them negative thoughts into that balloon, and then just exhaling them out and letting them go. So essentially you're working on control and letting go as well, which are two significant factors. I don't know, I thought we could actually do this as a group. I don't know, is that something, would you want to try a breathing technique with me? Yeah? Or shall we just move through it? But it's something that you can think about, okay? I mean, it's something that you can, yeah? Perhaps at the end, yeah, to help you detox from the presentation. But this is a breathing technique you can do. There's, like I said, there's different ones. So there's can be colored breathing, where you breathe in relaxing colors, exhale out. Ones that you find that are not as relaxing. It can be squared breathing, where you kind of breathe to imagine a square and kind of breathe according to that. So there's different ones that you can get, but yeah, they do help definitely. Another thing is grounding technique. Now, I've just used the generic grounding technique, something that I said, remember earlier on I said we connect to the world through our senses, and this is about bringing us back to the world, to the moment that we're actually in. Now, what happens in depression or any negative thought cycle, okay, is we get trapped into this thinking really negatively, and then we start going to worst outcomes, and we start having loads of assumptions of how everything's going to go wrong and everything's just going to end up really bad. One of the ways that we can actually do that is just by grounding ourselves and being in the present moment. When I talked about mindfulness and grounding earlier on, I actually mentioned this, and I said, when you talk about spirituality and psychotherapy and some of these things that are actually being promoted nowadays, are people connecting with themselves, connecting with the environment around them. When it comes to things like salah and things like this, we actually practice this 5 times a day. I know, I'm hands up, I'm probably not the best at it, but it is something that you can actually practice. And one of the ways that you can do that is actually becoming aware of what you're actually reciting in your salah, and actually being present in the salah as well. So, just kind of building that awareness that you are actually standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're actually in the prayer. It's quite interesting, I remember one of my teachers used to give a parable of a fan, like those ceiling fans that you have, and you turn it on and it spins, then you turn it off and it just keeps rotating, and then slowly it shuts off. Our minds are like that as well sometimes, these thoughts just keep running. So when you come into salah sometimes and you've come from work, and you can have residual kind of thoughts there in that moment as well. And it's actually just training your mind to switch off. It's difficult. So meditation can be difficult. It's not easy, but it's easier than having to deal with negative thoughts. Sometimes in life you've got to choose your heart, and this is one of them times where it pays off. Relaxation is an art, and we can actually learn that by actually engaging in it. Okay, so just getting your mind to still focusing in the salah, focusing about where you are, in what position, where you are, can really ground you. But in life generally, okay, just being present with yourself. So when you're drinking, or if you're having food, just kind of becoming aware of the smell of the food, okay, the taste of the food, the texture of the food. So this is mindfulness in eating. Okay, when you're outdoors, feeling the wind blowing through your hair, feeling the sunlight on your body, becoming aware of sounds that are around you. What you essentially do, and if you actually focus on that, like even if you just focused on 5 things in this room, that you could describe 5 things in this room, if you started doing that as a process, one of the things that you'll notice that you're not actually thinking about anything negative. You're actually living in the moment. You're actually there in time. So you're escaping your mind. So the grounding technique that I've got here is just kind of focusing. You don't have to do it in order, okay? It's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique. You can have a look at it. It kind of goes off 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. You don't have to do it in any structure like that if you don't want to, unless of course it helps you. But just becoming aware of where you are, and that will help you come out of your own mindset. So if there is times where you're feeling overwhelmed by emotions, because emotions are quite natural, just actually bring yourself to a state of awareness of where you are, your senses. What am I hearing? What am I seeing? What am I smelling? What can I taste? And it's a brilliant way of actually calming ourselves. And like I said, it can take a bit of practice, but once it's actually there, it's a brilliant technique to have. One of the last things, okay, is overcoming stigma and the cycle of shame. Now, you know, there's a lot of people that, I mean, me as a profession, I'm going to meet these anyway, okay? But I hear about it all the time in the communities, okay? People struggling with depression and they don't want to reach out, obviously, because of the shame. For men, again, like I mentioned, okay, there's that stigma of, you know, being demasculated if you speak about your emotions, or you know, if you speak about that needing help. But as I mentioned, okay, as a society, as a community, as a collective, you know, we're there to support each other, and this is what we should be promoting. When we look at it in the future, we should ask ourselves, what kind of a world do we want to leave for our future generations? And I'm hoping that it's going to be a nice one, and that's what I intend to try and achieve in some form. But some of the things that we can do ourselves is just that self-compassion and acceptance about where we are in life, okay? It does happen, the emotions, okay? We do sometimes, we are going to feel low mood states. It's essential. Sometimes they can get very overwhelming, okay? And they can become quite persistent. And if you feel that, it's okay to ask for help. You know, it's okay to have help. You know, we can talk about this, sharing our stories with people. You know, I mean, sometimes we have people that are going through depression, don't know what depression is, might put it off to other things, or just stress, or you know, or just general overwhelm, but actually are feeling very depressed and in a dark place. If need be, okay, seeking treatment and support from mental health professionals. We shouldn't hold back from this. I know when I mentioned about medicines before, I know a lot of people that will say, no, I don't want to be taking I don't want to talk to my GP, or I don't want to talk to a therapist, okay? No, if you need it, you know, don't feel that it's a sign of weakness. In fact, it can make a massive difference, and it can essentially speed up that process for you, rather than just trying to kind of persevere with it. So one of the things in society itself, okay, is just changing people's perception on depression. It is a mental illness, okay? When it sets in, it sets in. It can be, some people can understand it. I mean, it can be in a reaction to something like when Sheikh was talking about grief and loss. You know, it's quite natural if you're going through a bereavement, you're going to feel down. However, if it becomes persistent and it's carrying on for weeks on end and people can't come out of it, it's one of the things where they just need support, okay? And you know, depression can set in situations like this, and it can take a hold of people where overgeneralization set in, and they think that everything, or they can fear loss of everything. So you know, if it is in that, just understanding that dynamic for people, and just pointing them in the right direction, or offering them words of support, or just listening to them. Similarly, mental health is becoming quite a big problem, okay? So supporting organizations, working with them, volunteering for them, giving them your time is the best thing you can do. In fact, giving people your time is the most significant thing that you can do. You know, and this is as you know, hearing stories from people, even in my own personal reflections on my own life. You know, things like money and stuff like this, they come and go, okay? Time is one of them things that, you know, once it's gone, you can't get it back, and you can't give it to people. And I think, especially as a parent, I reflect on this, you know, towards your children and stuff. One of the most things, the most precious things that you can give them is time, and it's the same with anything else as well. So if there's people that are struggling, just giving them a bit of time, supporting organizations that are there, volunteering, helping out, okay? Challenging negative stereotypes and misinformation, okay? A person, like I mentioned about in depression, one of the things that can happen is people can often neglect themselves really badly. Instead of shunning them, okay, maybe just kind of asking what's going on for them, pointing them in the, again, just offering them general support. And the other thing, okay, is encouraging open and honest conversations about mental health. We shouldn't make people feel bad about it. With depression, one of the things that the common thing about, oh, you'll get over it, or just go through it, or no, it doesn't work like that for some people, unfortunately. Okay, when people are actually really depressed, they are in a place of absolute hopelessness, and they can't find it. They can't see a way out. Basically, all they see is the darkness of the place that they're in. And they can't move out from it. So, just having people at least be able to approach you, speak to you, and then signposting them if possible, or just being there to support them through that. So, kind of going forward, I mean, depression is one of them dreary places. Like I mentioned, for people who are stuck in it, it just feels like there's no way out, but there is actually. One of the things, from here, even with low mood states or whatever, life is going to have challenges. And looking after our mental health means we develop this resilience to be able to go through these challenges. Okay, and one of the things is what Sheikh mentioned early on is that nothing in this world lasts forever. It's fleeting. Everything is. Life itself is. Okay, and just like your happiness won't last, your problems don't last. Okay, even though when you're in it, you might feel like this is it's never gonna end. But no, okay, it will. So understanding that recovery is possible, it will, that darkness will go, it will dissipate, okay, by just doing the right things, just making small movements, okay, small little achievements, small little things, reaching out to people, it will dissipate. Surrounding yourself with supportive, encouraging people. You've heard this many times, yeah, you are what your company is. So, if you have people that are around you that can be quite demoralizing, putting you down or whatever, everyone's very different, okay, it can overwhelm you. There's other things in life as well. Human interaction is a challenge, but what we don't want to do is chip away at everything. So when we look at it from the perspective of religion, okay, it's important. But humans can present challenges for other humans, and they can sometimes say things, do things which will make us think, okay, or we might just jump to assumptions and assume the worst. But it's about, if we keep detracting or taking things out of our life, eventually we're not going to have anything, okay? So sometimes it might feel like just avoiding situations, but it's actually learning how to manage these situations, which in the long run serves us better. And that can be sometimes instilling boundaries within relationships, okay, or just learning how to navigate things, learning to what level you can depend on other people or use or engage with other people, and just kind of keep it to that. But one of the things that is very, very helpful is support, having supportive and encouraging people that are like-minded, people that are driven. This generally, okay, helps motivate us in a good way. Another thing, engage in self-reflection, personal growth and activities. These are important. How we spend our time is very important. Trying to kind of get away the way things are nowadays, a lot of people spend time on social media, gaming and things like this. I mean, I'm not slating anyone, okay? As an activity, it might be something that's helpful for you, but spending too much time in it is never good. You're exposing yourself to a lot of negativity sometimes, especially on social media, or you can be making these unrealistic kind of contrasts with people, because you might see people having this fabulous life, which is maybe just a day in their life, or a day that we don't really know what's going on for anyone, but we can kind of get caught up in that. So kind of engaging in self-reflection, personal growth and activities, things that are productive for us, okay, do things that are productive for yourself. Finding ways to connect, meaningful ways to connect with others. There's a lot of actually good things going on in Rochdale itself as well. So one of the things that I mentioned early on was you'll see a lot of these Muslim hiking groups coming up, okay. Generally what I find is environment is a big factor that impacts us. So what I find is when people are outdoors in nature, they just generally just chilled out. Everyone's got their guards down, and you can have really good conversations with people. So kind of finding ways to connect with others. There's groups for women that are in Rochdale as well. I know there's an organisation called Become United. There's groups that they have for men and for women. These are Rochdale based as well, and they are with some of the areas just around Rochdale that they go walking in as well. You can even create your own things with your own family members, with your own friends or whatever. Just have a little kind of, I've got a little WhatsApp group that I have, when I go out hiking, and it's just for friends and family. And we just arrange dates twice a month or something. We just get out and do things. It can be other activities as well. So like if you're into going like boating, or just kind of doing other little activities that you enjoy, or just exercise, going running, going gym, whatever, you can have these little kind of groups where you can work through these things, and it's a good way of connecting with other people as well. Building resilience, coping skills to face future challenges. Like I said, okay, life is going to happen whether you like it or not. Okay, there's going to be challenges that are going to come towards you, and it's about learning how to navigate these challenges. Okay, there's some coping strategies that I've mentioned. I know this is just a brief. I've gone through this. I've tried to condense as much as I could into this presentation. However, on a long-term kind of basis, I've mentioned to Sheikh Asad, maybe in the future we can look at self-care, and doing actual workshop where we can work through of things that we can do that are good for us and engaging for us, and ways and mediums we can actually work on this. So something that we can do in the future. But building resilience, some of the ways that we can actually do this is just working on the negative thoughts, overcoming the negative cycles that we have with ourselves, the way we address ourselves, the way we talk about ourselves, the way we actually see ourselves as well, keeping it realistic. I'm going to make mistakes, okay, learning to overcome from these, or take the lessons from them and drive ourselves forward. Journal, see what it is that you're missing out on. The other thing is reflecting on past experiencing and learning from them. I've said this quite a few times, and the reason why I've said this quite a few times, because this is one of the things that flags up for people a lot, okay, is when they kind of look back with guilt, shame. I see this when I work with it. Anyone who has guilt, shame, these are natural emotions, okay, it's an indication of a person with a good moral compass. Okay, but you're not to take that compass and bash yourself over the head with it. Okay, it's not about making yourself feel worse. It's about, okay, I've made a mistake. Accept it. We all make mistakes. I've made a mistake. Okay, how do I correct this now? Where do I go with it? How can I improve this? How can I make sure it doesn't happen again? And it's taking the lessons that we need from it and moving forward. It's not about getting caught up in that cycle, because that will just take you further and further down into that depressed state. The other thing, okay, is look, life, like I mentioned, is going to happen. Embrace the journey of healing, growth, and it's just a lifelong process. I mean, this is one of the greatest gifts is for a person to know themselves. But can we actually truly know ourselves? No, we just embark on that journey and we learn about ourselves. And the more we learn about ourselves, okay, the better we can get. If we just kind of looked at this aspect of journaling through our day and looking at what we did through that day, how we could do it better. If we just did that, even if we did it a couple of times a week, could you just imagine in years where we'd be mentally and emotionally? So it's about embracing that journey. Life is about learning, and we do the best we can. No one expects perfection from us, and we shouldn't expect it from ourselves. We definitely don't expect it from others. Okay, so it's just about embracing that. Now, I'm not over on the time, have I? Okay. So some of the resources, okay. So I've just put this down. There's things that you can use online. So there's phone apps, there's resources. YouTube has, it can be a very constructive force. It can be a destructive force. It depends on what you expose yourself to, okay? And I'm guessing you're going to expose yourself to good things. But just kind of things like hypnotherapy, guided meditation, sounds of nature. Sounds of nature is brilliant, okay? Everyone's going to have their own perspective on things. I use hypnotherapy for treatment, so for me, it definitely has a positive aspect to it. There's guided meditation. You can get Islamic guided meditation as well. Have a look at that. But this is just about controlling thoughts in your mind. It's about building that ability to still your mind, and that's a skill. It's a skill. BuzzFeed's, when I was talking about self-care, A to Z of self-care, there's loads and loads and loads of ideas you can have on there. Obviously, not everyone will apply to you because they are very generic, but there's things that you can do, activities that you can do and bring into your day-to-day, which you'd enjoy, okay? The NHS has good stuff on, and some of it is the Eat Well and Sleep Well guides. This is about how you can improve your diet, okay, because that plays a big factor in it, and also how you can improve your sleep as well. There's other stuff, Headspace, Stop, Breathe, Think, okay, that's a nice thing where you actually, when you're in a situation, to just stop, just breathe, like I mentioned, taking these deep breaths, and just think about what's going on for you. So it's almost like you're looking at a situation as a third person, okay, and that will help you to make better choices. You don't feel under pressure to do something straight away. If you feel that you need time, just say to the other person, especially in conversations, this can happen. Step back, say, look, can I have a moment to think about it, and then just mull it over and then do what you want. Calm, catch it as well as another one, okay, for your thoughts. putting down thoughts. Why am I having this thought? Okay, is it negative? Is it positive? Why am I having it? Okay, how can I change it? And overall, it'll make massive difference. Yeah. So them are some of the things that I've just put down as kind of resources that you can use. Inshallah, if there's anything else that I come across, I will definitely share them with Sheikh and he can put them forward. But that's pretty much me at the end of the presentation. Hopefully there's things there that you can think about, and there's things that you might be able to bring into your day-to-day routine that can help you. I'm open to taking any questions if you want, and I would ask if you can keep them towards depression. That's brilliant. So the subject at hand. But yeah, feel free to fire away at any questions that you have.
Do you think a lot of depression also comes down to us not having
That's one for you, I think.
Like I said before, that although depression is not a